Got enough pies for Pie Day.
Hi everyone. Thank you for coming. No.
Oh, I know you're ready though. No, you're fine. That's great. Hey everybody, thank you for coming to Krista's presentation. It has been, I know everybody always says this, but it has really been a pleasure being her mentor throughout this. I had a special experience yesterday, or an awkward experience maybe, where I went to Ingles and everybody was looking at me kind of strange. And I realized it was because I'd left school with the ash on my forehead. And that whole experience also kind of reminded me a lot about her topic, because she's going to be talking about people who oftentimes walk around with a visual symbol of their faith, and what it must be like. And so, I mean, yesterday we had just a small, like if you had an ash on your forehead, just like a small kind of taste of that. But Krista has really, really gone out of her comfort zone for this. She has talked to people in the community that she's never met before, just cold called them out of the blue, and has just had such enthusiasm for this topic. And I really admire her for the way that she has attempted to learn, and the way she has learned so much about a culture that's really unfamiliar to her. And I think that she's grown a lot from the experience. And I know that I've just learned a lot from just working with her for this as well. So it's also been a true pleasure for me. So
thank you.
No, I will let you start.
Thank you for coming to my senior thesis. And happy Pie Day. Please help yourself to some pie. So my title is Behind the Curtain, Unveiling the Truth About Hijab. And to give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about, this is my thesis statement. Although hijab is a mandatory aspect of the Muslim faith, various factors have affected the different ways in which people practice it. So what does hijab mean? This is the Arabic word for hijab. So when we hear hijab, we think of the scarf on a Muslim woman. And this is correct, but the actual definition from Arabic to English translates to curtain. And in an Islamic sense, hijab encompasses modesty for both men and women. This word is arwa in Arabic, and that means the private parts that one is meant to cover with hijab for both men and women. And they are different for the two. So men are believed to cover from the navel to the knee, and women have to cover everything except for their face and their hands. But this is like largely disputed, and there are millions of interpretations of what arwa is meant to actually mean. So hijab may seem like a very significant part of the Muslim faith, but it's only mentioned 3 times in the, explicit covering of a female is only mentioned 3 times in the Quran, or the Muslim holy book. So the first of these is in Surah, or verse 24:31, which instructs women to draw their veils over their bosoms, not to display their beauty or ornaments, and not to draw attention to themselves. It isn't mentioned again until Surah 33:53, in which the people are instructed not to view the wives of the Prophet Muhammad except from behind a curtain, otherwise known as a hijab. And the final mention of the covering of a woman is in Surah 33:59, in which they are instructed to cover themselves with their outer garments when abroad. And this gets into the functionality of hijab apart from the religious factor, such as like protecting oneself from molestation or the sun or whatever may be present. And so you might have noticed that some of those commandments are very vague. And this is a significant factor of Islam because it allows for something called ijtihad, and that's what that is. It translates to effort, and it means the pondering and interpretation of the text, which is also present in the other Abrahamic faiths with a term called exegesis, which is the interpretation and cultural application of the scripture. So all of this vagueness allows for a wide variety of hijab throughout cultures across the world. So I'm going to go over just a couple of variations that are common. The first of which is called the abaya, which is common in Saudi Arabia. The traditional abaya is black, but there's a wide variety of colors available. And it's essentially a dress that goes over one's normal clothes. And it's common, I think I already said this, but it's common in Saudi Arabia and the Arab Gulf region. The next garment is called the chador, which is common in Iran. And this is just an enveloping cloak that falls over the head and covers the whole body, and you have to like clench it below your throat to keep yourself covered. Okay, and the last one is called a himar, and this is just a cape-like veil. It's worn all over the world. So all of those garments were like dresses or like cloaks, but there's also garments that are meant only for the head, and this is called the alamira, which I think kind of looks like one scarf, but it's actually two. This is like a cap, and then it's covered with a tube of the same fabric, so it's an easy solution to hijab, and that's all over the world. And another one is called the shaila, which is basically just a huge skirt, and it's intended for Islamic fashion though, and it's common throughout the Gulf countries. So now I'm going to talk about face veiling, which is another significant factor of hijab. Although it is never mentioned in the Quran, it is still prominent around the world, and some people find it as an attention-seeking or odd practice, but others find it as a way to devote yourself further to modesty. And like hijab, there are multiple types of niqab, that's what this word is, which means mask, otherwise known as face veiling. So this on the left is a half niqab, which straps below the eyes and falls to cover down to the chest, and then it's worn with an accompanying headscarf. And then on the right, these are multi-layered niqabs, which just fall over the whole head and reveal nothing except for the eyes. And like hijab, there are cultural differences throughout the world. So one that I find really interesting is called the batula, and this is common in the Persian Gulf, which is around Oman and the United Arab Emirates. It's like a bird-like mask, which allows people to practice their Muslim identity as well as connecting to the culture of the area. And then the final form of face veiling I'm going to cover is the burqa. So this is the most concealing of all Islamic garments, and it's essentially just a big garb that covers the entire body, except for the eyes, which you can see through this little mesh window. So all of that was for women, but there's also hijab for men, although it is often overlooked by outsiders. But it is mentioned in the Quran before hijab for women. So I'm going to go over a couple of those garments as well. So the veiling of a man's face is very uncommon throughout the world, but there is evidence that Prophet Muhammad veiled his face. So there's still some people who practice it. One example of this is in the North African tribe of Tuareg. They believe that by covering their face, the enemy won't be able to see their thoughts, and so that it's just a way to protect themselves from enemies and like connect with their tribes. And that is Northern Africa. And so this is called a thobe. These are Gucci thobes. It's a white, loose, like dress that has the top is like a shirt, and it's worn all throughout the Middle East. It falls to the ankle, and it's just a way to cover, like to be modest and really connect, like practice their Muslim identity, because they stand out, like they don't look like regular clothes. Okay, so I'm going to talk about all three because this man is wearing all of them. This is a gutra, this checkered scarf, which is secured by the igal, which is this rope up here, and his cloak thing is a fish. So the gutra and igal would be worn by men all across the Arab Peninsula, again, just to connect to their Muslim identity. And the bisht, this decorative robe, would really only be worn by a religious leader. So all of that aside, all of the external hijab, more significant is the internal hijab, the hijab of the mind and of the heart. Men and women are instructed not to look at things that will get them into their thoughts. And I think this quote well exemplifies internal hijab. Say to the believing men that they should lower their gaze and guard their modesty. So what is the difference between male and female hijab? Kind of already talked about arwah, but so they have different levels that they need to cover, but there is still a double standard in some countries across the world. For example, this picture was taken in Iran, where chador and full hijab is fully enforced by the government. But as you can see, these men in the back are not covering their navels or anything. No one cares if they're covered. But the women always have to be covered, even when they're swimming. So this does get into the political issues within the Middle East. But it's important to understand that the oppression that comes with hijab is not an Islamic practice. Like, there's no oppression in putting on or taking off the hijab. It's purely due to the broken government within the Middle East. And perhaps the most drastic shift in politics with hijab occurred during the Iranian Revolution. So the purpose of the Iranian Revolution was to overthrow the Pahlavi dynasty, who at the time was run by Reza Shah. Reza Shah wanted to make Iran seem very modern and Western. So from 1935 to 1941, he placed a ban on the chador in all hijab. And even after the ban was lifted, it still remains stigmatized, and it was almost a protest to wear the hijab. And this woman, Hamideh Marifat, who I do not have a picture of, she decided to put on hijab as an act of protest. So at the same time of Reza Shah, who wanted to make everything modern, there was a leader named Imam Khomeini, and his views were completely opposite. He wanted the rule of the government to be in the hands of the religious clergy, which is Wilayat al-Faqih. So there was a lot of political turmoil and unrest that led to the rise of Imam Khomeini. And almost overnight, hijab and chador was mandatory. So this allowed for a really unstable environment in Iran, and surrounding countries started being affected and kind of copying what had happened there. So that led to mandated hijab throughout the Middle East. And there's a similar climate in Saudi Arabia, where women have even less rights. I think until mid last year, women were just granted the right to drive, which is never even mentioned in the Quran. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, there are still countries where hijab is prohibited. For example, in Turkey. So before Turkey existed, it was Persia. But then, all of a sudden, Turkey existed because we have Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. And he wanted to make Turkey seem like a very westernized, modern country. So he abolished the Arabic script, and he placed a ban on chador and hijab, like before the revolution in Iran. And this created a really polarized country. So Turkey remains polarized. There's still some sections that are heavily religious, while there's still buildings where hijab is not even allowed. So this contrast in political climate throughout the Middle East proves that this is not an issue with the practice itself, because it's a purely innocent practice, and the broken governments within the Middle East is what causes oppression to occur. So far I've been talking about hijab in the East, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about Western hijab. So to get a kind of a wide picture about what Western hijab looks like, I researched and conducted several interviews with hijabis across the world. And this is an interview that I read. Her name is Fariha Muhammad, and she chooses to wear hijab to practice her feminism because she believes that she can choose what people see in that culture. And she is from Canada, as is Razia Hamidi, who wears hijab because she believes everyone submits to something, whether it be the fashion industry or their religion. And like her, she chooses to submit to her God. And she also believes that it protected her from making bad decisions in high school. And now an example of a completely secular person wearing hijab is Camila Cabello, who recently posted this picture on Instagram. She put on the hijab purely out of respect for the mosque she was visiting. Another interview, I actually had the chance to talk to this woman who lives in South Africa. She's a cartoonist, and her cartoon also wears hijab. And she always assumed that she would wear it eventually, just growing up in a Muslim household. But once she got married, there was a lot of pressure from her family. And so that, combined with the religious reasons, she just decided to put on hijab. And this is the first woman who I actually interviewed in person. So this is Fariha Kabi, and her reason for wearing hijab is 100% religious. but at the same time, she finds logic in the practice. She finds that it keeps her out of trouble. And she told me about her friend, who is named Yara Ibrahim. And so then I interviewed her. And she wears hijab to showcase her inner beauty over her outer beauty, and to put a boundary between her and strange people who may not have good intentions. And she also found that hijab gave her strength in front of her daughter throughout her divorce. And she was telling me about a student at Clemson named Rowan Abdullah, who I talked to. And she wears hijab out of religious obligation, as do the others. But she finds it as a way to practice her modesty and again showcase her inner beauty, and just as a way to be herself. It's part of her personality. So the final form of the reason to wear hijab that I'm going to talk about is activism. That's me. I went to the Muslim Student Association National Hijab Day in Clemson, which is run by her. Yeah, and so they gave me a free hijab and free coffee as long as I promised to wear the hijab for the rest of the day, just to spend the day in hijab shoes. And it was extremely difficult. I always thought that people were staring at me, like just in the drive home, I was like, people were looking at me. And yeah, it was really interesting. This was just purely out of solidarity and trying to understand what it feels like. And this occurred last year at the World Hijab Day March downtown, where women, Muslims, and non-Muslims came just to raise awareness, practice solidarity, and celebrate World Hijab Day. So in conclusion, hijab does not necessarily imply hiding, like me or Camila Cabello putting on hijab, but there is no incorrect way to practice. Oh, and a big thank you to Ms. Nelson for being the best Miss forever, and Ms. Carter for being the best Miss Carter ever. To all my graders.